Hello and welcome. We're very pleased you can join us today for the launch of the International Energy Agency's new Renewables 2024 report. This is our flagship annual publication on the global renewable energy sector. I'm Jethro Mullen, head of the IEA's communications team, and I'm joined today by IEA Executive Director Dr. Fatih Birol and by Senior Energy Analyst Heymi Bahar, who led the analysis for the new report. And the new report, I would like to note, is free to read and download on our website, and it's also accompanied by our Renewable Energy Progress Tracker that enables you to dive into the data yourselves. So do please take a look. During today's press webinar, Dr. Birol will make some opening remarks, and then Heymi will present the key findings of the report. We'll then take questions from journalists. For the journalists taking part in this press webinar, we invite you to send your questions via the Q&A function in the Zoom. You can do this at any point during the presentation, and we'll also take a 2-minute break right after the presentation for you to enter your questions. And with that, I'll hand over to our Executive Director, Dr. Birol.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mullen. Greetings from International Energy Agency headquarters in Paris to all the colleagues, all the viewers of this press conference. Dear colleagues, as many of you know, at the IEA, we look at all fuels and all technologies. Where are they today? Where we think they may go tomorrow. A few days ago, we published our report on the natural gas markets. Next week, we have our monthly oil market report to be released during a rather volatile oil market context. But today, we are releasing our annual renewable market report. My colleague Heymi Bahar is going to give you some of the key findings of the report. But for me, there are a few extremely important outcomes from this report, and maybe to start with, when I look at the massive growth in renewables this year, what is happening, and in the next years to come, they are overperforming national governments' own plans and expectations. Huge growth. And this growth, I will give you a couple of minutes, some numbers, but before that, to make something clear, renewables' major expansion is not driven by policies, climate policies. They are purely, or at least I should say mainly, driven by economics. Today, renewables, solar and wind, especially solar, is the cheapest option to build a new power plant almost all countries around the world. And in many countries, in fact, solar plus storage, the battery storage, is cheaper than their competitors. So the biggest driver of the expansion we are seeing in the markets and in our report is driven by the economics mainly. And the numbers are striking. Last year, again, I was together with my colleague, Mr. Bahar, here to present you last year's report. And I remember very well saying that we are seeing in 2023 the historical record of renewables capacity additions, which was at that time, if I am not wrong, yes, 560 gigawatts last year, which was a historical record. And this year, 2024, this comes up to 670 gigawatts, 20% increase in 1 year. Huge growth. 670 gigawatts, and this is something, again, as I said, higher than many governments themselves expected. And when we look at the next few years, based on the projects, the investments, with the FIDs and country-by-country analysis, that a very detailed analysis. In fact, I should thank my colleague Mr. Bahar and his team. We see that between now and 2030, the capacity additions, total renewable capacity additions, will be around 5,500 gigawatts. 5,500 gigawatts. Which means this is equal to the entire power system, power fleet of United States plus China plus European Union plus India, 4 major markets put together. Their entire power system equivalent will be built as renewables in the next 6 years to come. This is a major transformation of our power system. Some may think it is the capacity, not the generation. We have the answer for that as well. When we look at the generation in 2030, which means tomorrow, about half of the global electricity generation comes from renewables. So 50% renewables, 50% coal plus oil plus gas plus nuclear, 50% renewables, around 50%. This is a huge growth. Almost all the countries around the world, we see this growth and all renewable sources. But if I have to simplify it and reduce this beautiful story with 2 words, it is China and solar. Of this major expansion between now and 2030, I just mentioned to you, about 60% comes alone from China of all renewables. This is a big growth. This is a result of Chinese major industrial policies and the cost of solar again going down. The second word is solar. China and solar. Solar has the lion's share of all the renewables growth between now and 2030, about again 60%. So these are very strong numbers. Whether or not this is in line with the COP28, the target that the international community, more than 200 countries put together, we are not yet exactly there, but we are very close. Between now and 2030, in our main case, base case, we expect the growth will be about 2.7 times vis-a-vis the 3 times of a growth expected or target set by the international community at COP28. So, dear colleagues, these are definitely, from a renewable perspective, encouraging news. What are the challenges? There are several challenges, but if I have to highlight one of them, which I see in many countries around the world is becoming a bottleneck, which is the following. I mentioned to you that we have this year additional capacity of 670 gigawatts, new capacity coming online. But there is a big amount of new capacity still waiting to be connected to the grid, about 1,700 gigawatts. So 2.5 times what is connected to the grid today is waiting The projects, solar, wind projects are waiting to be connected to the grid, and as a result of the not having enough grid capacity, they are just there and idle. So this is a major problem. In Europe, in Latin America, in some countries in Asia and elsewhere. So we see this as a major hurdle, and from a policy perspective, perhaps a priority if we want to see renewables to grow even higher. In addition to that, of course, reduction or the reducing the permitting time is critical. The average permitting time for wind is now up to 7 years, and for solar it is up to 5 years. So, dear colleagues, before I pass the floor to my colleague, Mr. Bahar, I wanted to also tell you that in addition to China, we see a strong growth coming from United States, from India, from Southeast Asia, Europe, and elsewhere. In fact, among the major economies, India has the highest growth of renewables in the world. Big growth coming from India as well. To finish, as I said in the beginning, these numbers today we are presenting to the world is a surprise to many governments, positive surprise, I would say. But looking at the market trends and the appetite from the investors around the world, I wouldn't be surprised that the next year, when we are here again, presenting you the next edition of this renewable market report, there will be still more positive surprises coming. So with this, I would like to turn to my colleague, Mr. Bahar, who was in charge of this report with his excellent team, I would say. They made once again a report which is detailed with very strong findings and the policy implications. Over to you, Mr. Bahar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Birol. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to start with a key message following up Dr. Birol's point on policies. Policies have been incremental and influential to reduce the cost of renewables and make them competitive. But in addition to policies, we see more and more markets and market conditions are driving the growth of renewables. And that's why we see that we see in the market that the deployment is going much faster than what governments have been planning or have been setting targets for. Just a maybe very good example that in our forecast that will make renewables capacity to reach 10,000 gigawatts by 2030 with a 2.7 times growth means that 70 countries in the world will surpass their own existing ambitions based on our forecast, and the largest of which being China, which already surpassed its wind and solar PV target this year, 6 years earlier than that was set. And this growth is driven by a good economics of renewables to add new renewable capacity, but also they're also becoming competitive with the existing fleet, not only with the new fleet that will make them even more attractive in the next couple of years. When we look at where the growth is coming from, the key word of solar is important because its role has become over time more and more important in the forecast that we have been updating every year. In the next 6 years up to 2030, we expect solar PV to account for almost 80% of all renewable power plants to be built. Why is that? The reason is quite simple. First of all, it's easier to permit and easier to build compared to other renewable energy technologies. There is the part which we call from residential and commercial customers, small installations that become attractive with the retail prices thanks to some of the policies as well. It's basically faster to build solar PV than any other technologies because there is no height, simply, in terms of the permitting. In that sense, we see solar PV going faster and installing more than 4,000 gigawatts of the capacity that we expect in the next 6 years, accompanied by wind. Wind sector, we are more positive this year because of two reasons. As the supply chain situations is being eased, and then second, the policies adapted to the macroeconomic conditions that wind sector has been faced. We see some improvements there. That's why we see the wind growth doubling compared to last 6 years. Maybe a few points on other technologies and hydrogen, renewable hydrogen. We see hydropower is growing stably, so mostly in the developing and emerging economies, but other technologies such as bioenergy, geothermal, ocean, and other renewables are not growing as fast, which we need them badly in terms of the dispatchable technologies. I think policy focus should also focus on those such as bioenergy, geothermal, and CSP, which are important for the next years to come. Maybe one point on the renewable hydrogen. Today, renewable hydrogen is only driving around 50 gigawatts of new renewable capacity, which means it's less than 1% of our forecast. However, there is another 50 gigawatts probably will be based on the existing power plants that we are building. Overall, though, we expect renewables hydrogen to account only for 4% of the global hydrogen production, and it needs to go a bit faster in terms of when we look at the plans. China's role has been increasing over time. As you can see in this figure, it reached almost 2/3 this year, and it will remain around 60% of the growth in our forecast. And every other power plant that will be built in 2030 in the world will be from China. This growth is really tremendous. China not only has been supporting renewables for a very long time, but since it phased out renewable energy subsidies, the growth has accelerated due to the costs. Because in China today, solar PV and wind are cheaper than coal, and then many utilities are buying renewables to reduce their electricity costs. And in addition to China, there is also an important doubling of the renewables growth in US and European Union. Obviously, these are driven by policies and economics together, especially in Europe. Repower Europe has been a good goal for renewables. We expect our forecast to be in line with the Repower Europe goals as countries are changing policies to go faster. In the United States, IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, is driving the growth mainly for solar PV, but also offshore wind and onshore wind. And India is coming back to the market after the several supply chain challenges that has been facing. It will be one of the fastest, actually the fastest growing economy for renewables in the world, not only for the demand of renewables, but also supply of renewables, thanks to the government policies. In other markets, renewables are accelerating, although it's lower than their potential. We see Southeast Asia, Middle East and North of Sub-Saharan Africa tripling renewables growth in the next 5 years compared to the last. However, there's tremendous potential there that can be tapped. There are a lot of challenges, and the main one being the high financing cost. When we look at our forecast and what is left to achieve the tripling, we have a pathway that we established in our accelerated case. And this pathway looks at three main challenges. One is being lengthy permitting. The other one is the inadequate grid infrastructure and lack of flexibility, and also high financing costs in the emerging and developing countries. If governments address those challenges in the next few years, we can see easily tripling being achieved. And for the first time, we are releasing what will be the breakdown of in our accelerated case, which is getting very close to this tripling. And China, United States, European Union, and India account for 80% of this forecast, followed by other regions such as Latin America, Middle East, and Africa. We have a lot of other countries outside of these regions that has high potential that can accelerate further to close the gap to tripling. This renewables growth also brings several challenges, especially with the wind and solar PV penetration. Already today, wind and solar PV accounted for 13% of the global electricity demand. And today, we see an increasing share of curtailments that is being done in multiple markets, as there are a lot of flexibility challenges and grid bottlenecks that are already in place today that will happen. And in the next 6 years, we expect renewables to reach 30%, with solar being the largest renewable generator. In that sense, these challenges are expected to increase over time and basically become more and more in many countries that needs to be addressed by increasing flexibility, investing in grids, and improving operations in addition to the investments in storage. We expect 19 countries to have 50% of their generation or more to come from renewables by 2030. And this number will only grow as we update the forecast. Few words on the manufacturing. The PV markets are changing very rapidly. The prices have come down more than 50% over the last year because of the supply glut in China. There is an incredible overcapacity situation. With that, though, we are seeing profit margins of the renewable energy manufacturers being negative after a solid profits that is being done. And this is leading some of the challenges of the forecast for expansion of the manufacturing capacity, including China. 25 billion worth of projects have been cancelled or suspended in the next 5 years. And we expect in the next 5 years an important challenge of the race for technology innovation for big companies versus the small companies that cannot invest in new technology will have high bankruptcy risks, possibly leaving the market. That's why we are revising down our forecast for manufacturing capacity for 2030, especially for wafers by 25%. Coming to the other side of the picture, electricity has been an incredible success story, but when we look at the other side of the energy system, which accounts for around 80%, the picture is not very positive. Actually, in those sectors, electricity is helping them to decarbonize with this great success. Especially in heat and transport sector, we see more electricity decarbonizing those sectors rather than other direct use of renewables. But the good news that for the first time, we did a renewable fuels analysis, which includes bioenergy, biogases, hydrogen, and e-fuels. And then we see the growth is slowly expanding. And today they account for 40% of the global renewables demand, and they will actually become lower in the future despite the growth because electricity is going much faster than them. And then overall, we expect those to only account for 5% of the global energy demand by 2030, as they are more expensive than other options. So calling for further policy support to carbonize industry and the transportation sector, especially aviation and maritime. Thank you very much, and I will turn to Mr. Mullen.
Thank you very much, Heymi, for the presentation. So we now have time to take some questions from journalists. And so we invite the journalists who are in attendance to send your questions through the Q&A function of the Zoom, if you haven't done so already. And please mention your media outlet along with your question when you send through the question. We'll just take a 2-minute break to give you a chance to send over your questions, and we'll be right back. Thank you. Hello and welcome back. Thank you very much for your questions. We're going to get to as many of them as we can. We're going to start with one from Tom Weingartner from Power News, who's asking about the goal of tripling and how that relates to the growth that we're forecasting, the growth of 5.5 thousand gigawatts between now and 2030. He thinks that would mean a doubling. So what is the year of reference? And can you say how much renewable capacity has increased in 2022 and 2023? So yeah, I think we'll take those questions. There's a few more questions he has, but maybe we can get back to him in writing on those because there's quite a bit of detail. And then around the tripling question, what is the key thing that countries need to do to reach the tripling goal? So perhaps, Heymi, you can explain a bit about the reference year and the numbers, and then Dr. Birol can speak about what needs to happen next.
Sure. So the reference years for the tracking the tripling pledge is 2022, not 2023, because it's signed in 2023 with a base line of 2022. So in that sense, we take that as a source. Our basically 5,500 gigawatts in the main case takes us to 10,000. And in our accelerated case, takes us to almost 11,000, which is very close to the tripling. So that is the basically the base year that we have. And for the renewables growth in 2022 and 2023, already we are seeing, we saw an acceleration in the annual additions. We have in 2023 about 570 gigawatts of renewables capacity growth, and in 2022 it was around 450. So we are seeing the growth going more and more in the coming years.
About the what can the governments do more? Maybe three things I can say. They can do many things, but three things are important. The first one is, I mentioned in the beginning, there is a great issue, how we are going to bring this, the capacity, the already finished or about to be finished power plants, the renewable plants, to the consumers, to industry, households, to the users. Grid is a big problem. We said that 670 gigawatt is this year the record, historical record, once again, is being installed. 2.5 times is waiting to be connected to the grid, but because of not having enough grids, capacity of the grids, we are just leaving them there. It's an economic sin, to be honest with you, and we want to highlight this as the number one priority. The second one is, in many countries, the permitting time for the solar and wind installations are taking a lot of time. There is some improvement here in some countries, but still there is a long waiting times, which is delaying the projects, and which in turn is a major challenge for the renewable industry. Perhaps the third one is the in the emerging and developing regions, especially in Africa and Southeast Asia, despite the huge potential, is the cost of financing is much higher than the other parts of the world. To de-risk those investments would be critical. And there is a role here, not only I mentioned the governments, but not only governments, but also international financial institutions to de-risk those investments would be of crucial importance. I mentioned Africa. Again, I want to highlight in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, we have huge potential of solar, point number one. Point number two, every second person still doesn't have electricity, access to electricity in Africa, and yet amount of solar capacity in the entire sub-Saharan Africa is equal to the solar capacity of Belgium. So there is something wrong here. So it is therefore one of the points that we discuss with the governments and the international financial institutions to support the investments for renewables and de-risk them as much as possible to see the expansion in those countries as well. So these are the 3 points I would choose.
Thank you very much, Dr. Birol. So we've got a few more questions to get through. Hopefully we can squeeze them all in. One from Amina Saeed from Cypher. So Cypher News, sorry. She asks, the report says renewables will overtake coal as an electricity source in 2025. So here we're talking about electricity generation from renewables. Will renewables ever overtake natural gas, and if so, when? And she says she asked because the report mentions that renewables will be responsible for nearly half of the electricity generated globally in 2030. So how does the remainder, the other roughly 54% of electricity in 2030, which sources is that coming from in the IEA's forecast? Just a note here that, as Dr. Birol mentioned at the start, we are releasing our World Energy Outlook report in 1 week's time, which will have more details across all fuels and all technologies with projections through to 2050. So some of this question maybe strays into the territory of the World Energy Outlook, but I'll let Heymi know what his report's analysis can say on this. Then we have a couple of sort of broader questions. Well, one regional question about the Middle East from Alvin Cabral from the National News in Abu Dhabi. He asks, what can Middle East countries do, particularly the UAE and Saudi Arabia, to boost their renewable energy capacity? And would it adversely affect the oil sector, which is a key driver of that region's economy? And then another question about oil producers and oil and gas producers from Wolf Kroner from B2Bio World publication. He asks, in your opinion, has the Russian shut-off of energy supplies, so here I think we're referring to the shutdown of, or the massive reduction in supplies of natural gas to Europe that spurred the energy crisis in 2022 that we're still feeling the effects of, has this spurred the turn to renewables? So perhaps, Heymi, you can talk a bit about what the report tells us about generation in 2030, and then Dr. Birol can speak about the situation in the Middle East, what the Middle East can do, and also what effect Russia's actions have had on the shift to renewables. Over to you, Heymi.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. So renewables are already generating more power than natural gas. Coal is the next one to pass. And the rest of the generation mix by 2030, as Jethro mentioned, we will have next week a more detailed fuel analysis coming from the World Energy Outlook publication. But one important point to make here that renewables are becoming basically the largest generation, and with wind and solar penetration increasing, accounting for 30% in our analysis. And more importantly, solar PV surpassing both hydropower and wind in terms of the generation to become the largest source of renewables by 2030. Maybe for the other one, for Europe, it was a turning point, obviously, what happened in 2022, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It was when Europe really started to accelerate renewable deployment compared to the period before. It's quite important to highlight this because with the policies that are pushed by the European Commission, Repower Europe, the new goals, and the governments actually implementing these policies very rapidly to address the challenges has been tremendously important for the renewable sector in the European Union. And we expect the spillover effects of this. And one important point that I think EU citizens and European Union realized how vulnerable the energy prices are in Europe and how it can go very rapidly up, which actually stimulated renewables growth, especially from companies and individuals to install more renewables to reduce their bills. I think this trend was an important one to highlight, and we expect this to be a key driver going forward as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe one thing for Europe to add on this briefly. So we all know that the renewables are good for the climate. Now we are discovering, the world is discovering that it is good for our pockets as well. The economics are, from economic point of view, it creates many benefits. But after the 24th of February, 2.5 years ago, after the Russian gas is cut in Europe, the governments, businesses, citizens in Europe and beyond discovered, quote unquote, that the renewables are good for energy security as well. It is a homegrown energy. So therefore, in addition to the climate benefits, economic benefits, renewables also present energy security benefits as well. Middle East question. The Middle East is, of course, there is a plenty of solar potential in Middle East, and both of these countries, which was asked by our colleague in Abu Dhabi, it is both Emirates and the Saudi Arabia, they both have strong, ambitious solar policies. And in fact, for the oil sector, if these plans are implemented, if the targets are achieved, it is in fact better for the oil industry in these countries, because there is a lot of oil now is being used for the electricity generation, and they could be freed up, and that oil, if needed, it can be exported, which in turn brings the revenues to those countries. So we have high expectations of solar penetration, both in United Arab Emirates and also in Saudi Arabia, and some of the other countries in the Middle East.
Thank you very much, Dr. Birol. So that, in fact, is all we have time for. We've covered the range of very good questions from journalists, and obviously if any journalists have further questions they'd like to follow up on, we invite you to reach out to our press office and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So it just remains me to thank Dr. Birol and Heymi. Thank you to the journalists for your questions. Thank you to everyone following this event online for your interest in our work. Just to note that if you enjoyed this event, we have another very interesting event this afternoon where former Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi will be joining Dr. Birol and ambassadors, business leaders and others for a roundtable discussion about the future of Europe's competitiveness. And you can follow that discussion live on our website and digital media channels this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. Paris time. So we invite you to join us then. And also, I would note that the full Renewables 2024 report is available for free on our website, along with the accompanying Data Explorer. So do please take a look at that. And that's all we have for this morning. Hopefully see some of you this afternoon for the discussion with Professor Mario Draghi. Thank you and goodbye.